Welcome back to another episode of Grandin Autism.
Hello everybody, here we are at a huge mall in Nyack, New York, and I'm not much of a shopper at all, but this is something my daughter wanted to do, and it's interesting. The mall is a very loud place, a place where you're having different sounds come at you at once, different images. It can be a very difficult place for a child with autism. As you can see, my son is sitting next to me. Say hi, Jordan.
Hi.
And
We're at the mall.
And he's doing really well, aren't you, Jordan?
Yes.
This is a far cry from Jordan years ago at the mall. I couldn't really go into malls. It was very difficult for him. All the sounds, it was just very overwhelming for him. And so, something to see how far we've come. I'll be back. Take a look at this.
Six, 7, 8, 9. Take my hand.
No, Alex. It's fine, isn't it?
I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
Today's segment is about sensory overload. Come into their senses. It's a play on words, really. Have you ever heard someone say, I wish that person would come to their senses? In other words, they are acting irrationally. They need some common sense. People with autism are sometimes looked at as irrational. And in some cases, it has to do with their senses. Not their common sense, but their 5 senses: hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching. This is something the person without autism or who has use of all 5 of their senses takes for granted. Every day, every millisecond, our senses are bombarded with stimuli. Our systems allow us to adjust almost immediately to these cues. But for the child with autism, there is an impairment of the sensory system. Communication with the brain is disabled on some level. So when compounded sounds and lights and smells and touches are experienced, there's basically no filter. And this would cause anybody to have a breakdown or a meltdown. This was one of my son's main reasons for meltdowns as a young child, that and physical pain. As parents, we need to have an understanding of what our child is experiencing during a sensory overload. We need to come into their senses. Here's a short video that will explain to you somewhat of what sensory overload is like. Take a look at this. So this week's conversation is about sensory issues and the different sensory issues that autistic children deal with on a daily basis. Last time we talked about tantrums and meltdowns and what some of the causes of those may be. One of the main causes for meltdowns in children with autism is sensory overload. And so that's an important issue for us to think about as moms of autistic children. Take a look at this.
So what are the common causes of meltdowns in children with autism? Well, various triggers, and we know based on the diagnosis of autism, these kids have sensory sensitivities, have difficulty with rigidity and routine. You are going to find you have to look at some of these areas as whether there's been a noise that's bothering them, for example, the vacuum cleaner, for example, or I had a child who was covering his ears and running around the playground suddenly because he was hearing the sound of an aeroplane flying in the sky before the parents could actually see it. So sometimes you don't quite know what the trigger is, and it's a matter of being a detective. But if you know your child has sensory issues or auditory issues, be prepared when you go out to malls and noisy places, and because that can definitely be a trigger for a meltdown. A lot of these children have sensory regulation issues. So when overloaded by activity and sound, or if they're tired or hungry and sleepy, they're more likely to have meltdowns. So what they could tolerate otherwise, they're less likely to tolerate. And knowing your child, what their issue is, what is their particular concern, for example, whether it's clothing, for example, the label at the back of a shirt. Some kids, for example, have gluten sensitivity, and having had gluten or dairy added to their diet in a hidden formula, for example, parents have reported back to me that, my goodness, I noticed a change in behavior, or the child became more upset more easily and had more tantrums and meltdowns. So going backwards, but also dealing with it in the moment so that the child does not hurt themselves or hurt anybody else with their meltdown. But going back and really investigating or finding out what your child needs to prevent the triggers, what stimulates this upset behavior is very important.
So what can we do to help our children to cope during a period of time when you're experiencing sensory overload? Here are a few tips.
Hi, I have a 4-year-old son who was recently diagnosed on a spectrum, high functioning. We're getting 20 hours of ABA a week, but my son also has sensory issues.
Lots of kids have got sensory
Very
issues.
sensitive to sound. He loves to hug and press into my body. And so my question is, we're paying for occupational therapy. He's in this therapeutic listening program.
Is that helping him?
No. Not that I can tell
Now,
so far.
all right, let's look at now. His main problem is sound sensitivity.
He likes pressure. He likes to press his face into mine and hug and squeeze. And he can't stand being in a room where there's microphones and amps and Chuck E. Cheese and anything loud and
Well, one
indoors.
of the things to do is to take some of the sounds that he has problems with, maybe get it on a really high fidelity recording device, put it on a low volume and let him turn it on. Sometimes you can get to where you can tolerate a sound if the child initiates it and he's had too much, you can stop it. Or let's say you go to Chuck E. Cheese and then he can give you a signal so you can take him out of there before you have a meltdown. In other words, give him some control over the stimulus. Sometimes you can desensitize on sound sensitivity doing that.
But does occupational therapy, my question is, does occupational therapy help the sort of sensory issues?
On some sensory issues, it does.
It does.
What you've got to do, see, the problem we've got on the sensory stuff is there's so many subtypes. You cannot study sensory problems just based on autism or not autism. And what's the mistake that's being done on studying sensory issues is they're not saying, all right, let's take the kids that can't stand the regular standard tubular 60-cycle fluorescent light. We're going to study them. Or the kids that hate the smoke alarms, the mic feedback, those sort of noises. Or the kids that have taste aversion. They need to be put into different sensory problem groups. And then you could start to study them and find out what works. So I'd try different things. Some kids respond to slow swinging. Some respond to deep pressure. Some respond to a lot of heavy work types of things where they got to lift and carry stuff. Try different things and see what works. Some kids really respond to singing, and they can learn to speak by singing words because singing is different circuits than words. So you try things and you see what's working. Things that are not working, then don't do it. And there's a lot of things where you have to keep doing it. Some people say, well, OT doesn't work because you got to keep doing it. And I'm going, wait a minute. You got to keep taking blood pressure pills or they don't work. So you got the same thing. There's a lot of things that are like that.
It's just a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for joining me again for another episode of Weathering Autism. God bless you. See you next time. Bye.